And welcome to What Are We Thinking? A trip into the right hemisphere of the human brain. I'm Doug Grunther, your host. An exciting launch, and we were just enjoying something on the screen. I was told that comes from a drive-in movie theater in the mid-1940s. We've come a little bit of a way since then. And we're looking forward to our first launch here. This will go a little over an hour. Our special guest will be Robert Thurman. We recorded an extensive interview with this great Buddhist thinker. And we'll be playing that a little bit later on. And this is all about a part of our brain that we would do well to access to in the 21st century. And I thought, as a way to start, I would read the mission statement that we created for the website. The website I welcome you to enjoy is called rightbrainnetwork.org. And every week I update it with an essay. We add links and quotes and a good way to tune into the right hemisphere. Here's what the mission statement says. And if it sounds a little apocryphal and over the top, when I finish it, I'm going to read you what a friend emailed me today to prove that this is not apocryphal. Are you ready to help plant the seeds of the next renaissance? Our brains are being rewired. As modern neuroscience confirms, new technologies literally rewire the sense ratios of the neurons in our brain, changing patterns of thought and even altering how we dream. By the way, dreams will be the subject of our third webinar. Here in the 21st century, with exponentially expanding computer intelligence and worldwide digital connection as the driving forces of evolution, we are accelerating at a speed never before experienced in human history. Our brains are now connected to each other in ways never anticipated, like right now. This is going out all over the world from Kingston, New York. And what I'm saying is going through coaxial cables and out to LA, where it gets transmitted in less than 10 seconds. We have left the world of logical, linear, step-by-step sequential thought. We have entered the age of the quantum leap. What are we to think? Are we headed towards the next renaissance or mass anxiety? Probably both. So let's catch our breath, keep our wits about us, and tune into the deep patterns of change taking place. So the mission of this webinar and of our website is to see how we can thrive in the 21st century environment we are now in. And I thought a great way to make it more practical to start out is to talk about this amazing new strategy that started in the U.S. Army War College, then emanated out into high-level universities, and is now starting to percolate through leadership conferences. Now, you might say, U.S. Army College, why would we be interested in that in terms of bringing about a next renaissance? Well, some of you may know, the internet, which is crucial to what we're doing right here, came out of the U.S. military. They are the ones who created the infrastructure for the internet to help to make sure that its computer systems couldn't get annihilated by an attack in one place. Usually the military is pretty secret about their top level stuff, but they saw the value of the internet for research. And so they gave it to certain universities and it spread quickly. And here it is in the hands of all of us. Well, the U.S. Army College, War College back in the late 1980s realized they needed a totally different mindset to deal with the new zeitgeist. And they came up with a strategy, which is a 4-letter acronym. You may have heard of it. If you haven't, you will. It's called VUCA, V-U-C-A. The V is for volatility. The U is for uncertainty. The C is for complexity. The A is for ambiguity, because that's the age we live in. Now, those don't sound like fun-loving, nice day at the beach types of qualities. Usually we try to avoid volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. But what the U.S. Work College realized is that if we understand these processes, we can actually use them to our advantage. And now it's become part of business leadership, and it needs to percolate out for us cultural creatives to use. So let's talk a little bit about it. How do we use this? Well, it helps to distinguish the difference between the left and right hemispheres of our brains. Now, first thing, if you Google left hemisphere, right hemisphere, most of the websites you get to are going to oversimplify and give you a very mistaken kind of vanilla taste of this. They'll tell you the left hemisphere of our brain is logical, the right brain is creative. Not enough information, and not even correct, because our left hemisphere can be creative, our right hemisphere can be logical, but they are wired differently. We now know this through neurology, through MRIs and the study of neuroscience. And the way they see the world is very different. And Western civilization, ever since post-Renaissance, Italian Renaissance, has been very heavily weighted towards the left hemisphere. Our educational system is, our whole industrial outlook is. The left hemisphere is very important. It sees the world as something that needs to be taken apart so we can study the parts, how they fit together. And it can put together things and create great technologies. Its weakness is it doesn't like to share. And it cannot deal with uncertainty. It cannot deal with volatility. It cannot deal with ambiguity. It's not wired to do that. Our right hemisphere is. And it's interesting that neurologically, the right hemisphere is larger physically, has more synaptic connections for that reason. So nature gave it to us for a reason. My favorite book on the right hemisphere and its distinctions from the left is this one. Those of you who've listened to our radio show, The Woodstock Roundtable, are familiar with it. We excerpt it frequently, talk about it. It's called The Master and His Emissary. And the subtitle is important, The Divided Brain in the Making of the Western World. I want to give just one quote, which will give you a sense of why it's the right hemisphere of our brain, which we can learn to access more effectively to deal with the VUCA world. Remember, that's volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Here's the quote from page 40. Based on neurological studies, in almost every case, what is new must first be presented in the right hemisphere before it can become in focus in the left. For one thing, the right hemisphere alone attends to the peripheral field of vision, from which new experience tends to come. So when it comes to new perceptions, dealing with the unpredictable, which is what every creative artist does. If things weren't unpredictable, we wouldn't have a Picasso, we wouldn't have an Einstein. There's just a good head start on it. He continues, anything new, anytime our brains are presented with anything new, it triggers a release of noradrenaline, mainly in the right hemisphere. Novel experience induces changes in the right hippocampus, not the left. The hippocampus, there's a hippocampus in both hemispheres of our brain, and it's the part of our brain that deals with memory. When we dream, when we get impulses from the unconscious, it first percolates up through the right hemisphere, which is open to the strangeness of the unconscious, which then hands it over to the left, which tries to figure it out and doesn't always hand it back for a bigger analysis. So we'll be talking more about this in the future. Now, another way to really get into the right hemisphere of the brain is to talk about our featured guest today. Some of you may be familiar with Robert Thurman. He is a world-renowned Buddhist teacher. He taught at Columbia for decades. He was the first Westerner ordained by the Dalai Lama. Is still very close with the Dalai Lama and has been a very dynamic and popular speaker worldwide. But those of you who've heard Bob know he's very right hemisphere. He is the most dynamic Buddhist I've ever seen. I mean, he can be very forceful, use somewhat salty language, He's very demonstrative, as you'll see. And when you first listen to him, it's going to sound like he's all over the place. He does not talk in a straight line, which is what the left hemisphere likes, kind of sequential in logic. He kind of throws missiles out there, and we need to connect them. That's much more of a right hemisphere type of orientation. And a great synchronicity happened yesterday. I was having lunch with a friend, and he asked me about the first webinar, and I said, our featured guest will be Bob Thurman, and he told me this story. When my friend was in New York 25 years ago, he saw that Bob Thurman was going to give a talk, and he'd heard a lot about him. So he went, and he found it extremely disorienting and frustrating. He left very disappointed because he said, I couldn't follow it. It's all over the place. A year goes by. He sees Bob is speaking at another venue not far from him, and he said, all right, I'll give it another try. And it was even worse. He couldn't take it. Third year comes by, and he's determined, and he went in and he made an intuitive switch. He realized he wasn't defining it in terms of left and right hemisphere, but that's what was going on. He was listening with the left hemisphere of his brain, which is the way most of us listen. It's the way we've been trained to listen. It's the right way to listen when we're trying to really focus in on something specific and we want to learn something very certain and we want to get the right answer. But when we're dealing with really large, complex, uncertain, volatile, ambiguous types of messages, which is replete in the perennial philosophy and lots of spiritual philosophies, we need the right hemisphere, which doesn't try to condense everything into a certain answer. And so my friend said when he went to Bob's talk the third time, instead of trying to follow what he was saying sequentially, he just sat back in his chair, relaxed, and let the words and the insights come at him. And he said he thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought that's a beautiful explanation of switching from the left hemisphere, a much needed part of our brain, to the right, which is going to be much more effective and resourceful when you listen to Bob Thurman. Because if there's ever a right hemisphere thinker, it's Robert Thurman. So it'll be a good way to practice your right hemisphere thinking. I said before that the mission statement that we have on our website that I read might sound a little apocryphal. Well, just this morning, a friend of mine, thank you, Jude, who I think is listening, sent me a link to a site which started hurting my brain because it's technical and I'm not a technical guy, about something called memristor. I don't know if any of you have heard of that. I'd never heard of it. So I looked it up because it was tough to read the article, but I knew it was something important. And a memristor is a device that can retain memory without power. Recently, experts have made a breakthrough in memristors that can make it act like a neuron. Neurons are the basic elements of our brain. So computer intelligence is increasing exponentially, not arithmetically. And the word exponentially doesn't capture the sheer insanity of the rate of change we're going through. But I was taught a great lesson in exponential increases by my sixth grade teacher, who one day said to us, which would you rather have? This is back in the early 60s. Which would you rather have? $1 million, back then $1 million was a lot of money, or a penny doubled for a month? I raised my hand. I'll take the $1 million. Well, I was way off. By the way, by the time you get to the 31st day, if you double a penny every day, you're at over $1 billion because things go exponentially. After the 21st or 22nd day, you haven't made that much money doubling a penny every day. But in the next week, you become a multimillionaire. And that's what's happening with computers. Now, as we're doing right now, we may not be conscious of it, our human brains are interacting with these computer brains. If we do it right, it's going to be a great advantage. It can bring about the next renaissance. If we don't, it's going to be mass anxiety. And it's the right hemisphere of our brain that the computers can't even come close to duplicating right now. They're very good at duplicating the left hemisphere of our brain. They can remember much better than us. They can beat our best chess champions. They can beat our best Go champions, which is a more complex game than chess and requires intuition. They beat the best Jeopardy contestants, even though some of the questions require a kind of subtle understanding of English language. But the computers cannot match the imaginative, creative, expansive, intuitive region of the right hemisphere. So that's what we're going to be celebrating in this webinar on the website, rightbrainnetwork.org. And today, we're not going to have too much time for it, but this is live. You can also access this for 1 week. You've been getting prompts from VIP webinars, our partners. So you can access this anytime for the next week. But if you're watching us live and would like to send in a question or comment, you do that by emailing us right now at doug@rightbrainnetwork.org. doug@rightbrainnetwork.org. If we get a question or comment in the next few minutes, we'll handle it. And then we're going to go to our 40-minute interview that we recorded a few weeks ago with the great Buddhist teacher and celebrator of the right hemisphere, Robert Thurman. There'll be an intermission, so you get to see that wonderful drive-in stuff again. And then we'll do a wrap-up at the end of that. So that's our strategy for today. Again, our email here is doug@rightbrainnetwork.org. Ron, do we have something? Anything yet? Okay. So send those in, and we can handle those after the webinar if they come in, because our email might be a little slow. So let's get ready for the featured guest, Robert Thurman. I suggest you sit back, relax, listen any way you choose. But if you try to follow him sequentially and logically, good luck. But I think you'll find it very exciting. And let me give you a little heads up, because I've interviewed Robert many times. And this time I really wanted to focus on the right hemisphere of the human brain. So I was Googling around, looking for a quote of his that spoke to the right hemisphere. And I found one in 6 words that I thought was so provocative, which is, wisdom is tolerance of cognitive dissonance. Wisdom is tolerance of cognitive dissonance. This is the first question I throw at him. Cognitive dissonance, some of you may know, is a psychological phenomenon that happens when the human brain tries to hold 2 or more opposing beliefs or values at the same time. If we can do it, we can actually get to a more enlightened insight. But it's at first painful to hold 2 opposing views at the same time. So what do we tend to do? We tend to either dismiss one side, choose, welcome to our political divide and our cultural divide that we read every day in the headlines, or our brain just shuts down. It can't handle it. Interestingly, the essay I'm writing now, which will be up on our website by Sunday, is on my favorite Right Hemisphere movie, 2001: A Space Odyssey. And Arthur C. Clarke tells us, one of the co-authors, in 2010, the sequel, that the reason HAL broke down is because of computer cognitive dissonance. Humans inputted 2 opposing instructions that he couldn't deal with. Well, you can read the essay at rightbrainnetwork.org. At any rate, that's our introduction. Robert Thurman is really an exciting talker. And what's fun here is when we interviewed him on Zoom, he was at his office in Woodstock, and behind him, you'll see this magnificent blue mandala and the very dynamic Robert Thurman. So here is our interview. Well, I look forward to welcoming in Robert Thurman. Bob is one of the world's leading Buddhist teachers. He's the personal envoy of the Dalai Lama. He has published over a dozen books. He's the co-founder of Tibet House with Richard Gere in New York City. He's the co-founder of a beautiful spiritual retreat called Menla in the Catskill Mountains, not far from Woodstock, New York. And we always enjoy speaking with you, Bob. Good afternoon.
Well, good afternoon, Doug. Nice to talk to you.
Now, the title of our webinar is What Are We Thinking? A Trip into the Right Hemisphere of the Human Brain. So I was looking through the internet for quotes or insights from you that might relate to that. And I came up with a quote of yours, only 6 words. And those 6 words are incredibly provocative and interesting. Wisdom is tolerance of cognitive dissonance. So how do you explain cognitive dissonance, and how is tolerance of that lead to wisdom?
Right. Well, thank you for that question. I just want to make one statement, which is I'm not any formal envoy of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I'm just an old friend since 1964. 56 years friendship we've had. And I love the guy, and he's a teacher of mine, you know, and of everybody's. He's a really good guy. So the issue of cognitive dissonance has to do with the fact that when the Buddha realized the nature of reality, he had a direct experience of it, you could say. You know, he became a kind of infinite field being who knew everything by being one with it all, something like that. Just like sometimes, you know, if you're in love with someone, or you feel you really know them because somehow you see the world through their eyes in some sort of ecstatic moment or something like that, you know. And so you know by being, rather than see something as an object different from yourself. And in order to, and when you do that, and not just, when I say reality, that means any kind of reality. It's like when you're eating a delicious apple or a mousse au chocolat, and you get so much into it that you just kind of, it's inexpressible, you know, and someone asks you, how is it? You might say fantastic, wonderful, or you might sometimes say, well, it's beyond words, you know, it's inexpressible. And all of reality, therefore, is actually beyond words, because words can only pick up a facet of your experience. It's sort of, shave off a surface or something. And the sort of depth of what we feel and experience is so complex and so wonderful when it's positive. And Buddha just found out that when you experience any reality to its full depth, it's totally positive. It's complete. You give yourself to it, and it's just wonderful. And so, in order to get there, we have to take because normally we live in reality as we describe it, and therefore we sort of never normally experience anything beyond what we expect to experience, because if we fit it in, we right away carve it up and say, okay, instead of like just. When I see a Van Gogh painting of crows circling around haystacks in Provence, you know, at the time he was painting it, instead of just being there in the field with the crows and feeling the heat and the crows and the whole thing, instead of that, I say, oh, there's a painting, Van Gogh, oil painting, or he was crazy. Maybe he was stoned on the turpentine that he inhaled while he was painting, whatever. In other words, I divide myself from the experience by putting a grid of concepts over it. And so therefore, when you do that, when you develop a contemplation, you develop an awareness, and you see things from many different angles. And actually, if you pursue the conceptualization of something from 2 angles, at some point they kind of collide with each other. And you get a kind of doubt, well, which is correct? Like, for example, you see a solid wall, and then, oh no, but that's actually a bunch of atoms and molecules and, you know, subatomic energies, and it isn't really a solid wall. But wait, which one is correct? And actually they contradict each other. But when you can realize that both are correct, that's at the moment where you leave being trapped by either one of them. And you go into a non-verbal, trans-theoretical, direct experience where you become what you experience. And because you have encompassed both sides of the paradox, you have kind of broken yourself free from being trapped in the network of concepts in which we normally entrap our experience. Okay, how's that? Is
That
that
was
clear?
beautiful. But I want to get to, because we've all had that experience, but I think most of us sort of just want to get there without the challenge of the tolerance of cognitive dissonance. And so can you give us an example, maybe from either you personally felt or one that you, from the Buddhist literature, where someone actually breaks through that cognitive dissonance? Because it's an uncomfortable feeling to hold two disparate thoughts at the same time, but the human brain is very capable of that if we train it to do that.
That's true. Well, in fact, in the progression of achieving, direct experience of something, they say that you develop first the tolerance of the cognitive dissonance stress of cognitive dissonance. You develop it; it becomes like a tolerance, and then the tolerance expands our normal thing of identifying with one side or the other. And we have to give ourselves out in a way. We have to learn to kind of let go of wanting to reduce it to this or to that, you see. But then in a way, you could even say, there's a Zen expression that when they attain satori or enlightenment, that they undergo what's called the great death. So it's almost like a dying experience. But there's another experience that might be similar, where it's the contradiction of self and other that you embrace, which is a sexual experience. And the French word for an orgasm is a little death. And so, and there may be a kind of stress point in building up to a sort of release like that. But actually, it turns out when you can let go, then you discover that you are this kind of wave of energy and bliss that is much greater than you could either capture by calling it this or calling it that, and retreating back into your conceptual fortress where you normally feel comfortable, your normal comfort zone, where you're sort of comfortable, but then you're also dissatisfied because it doesn't last, and you have a concept of something better in your mind, and all these other things go on. So yes, it's stressful, and there are many examples of the experience of such a breakthrough. I mean, the whole literature is filled with that. Even the whole Buddhist teaching is filled with that. And it's very cool, actually. I love the Buddha. That's why I love him. For example, he says on that morning when he attained his enlightenment in the usual way the story is told, he touched the earth and he sat under the tree and he saw the Venus, the morning star, the dawn star, just before the sun rose, the sun was just coming. And he says, wow, I really feel that everything is so great. I'm so happy. And then he thought to himself, there was no one else present, no human being present. But anyway, he thought to himself, gee whiz, it's too bad I can't explain this to anybody. In other words, because it's beyond words, you know it by being it, but you can't just capture it back into something that would be expressible. So it's inexpressible. It's so great, in other words. And it doesn't fit with anybody's presupposition. But then he realized what I can do is I can help people learn to develop the tolerance of not being able to, of allowing reality to escape their preconceived ideas, and go in and trust the reality and trust themselves to reality to the extent of letting themselves go into it, kind of thing, and not insisting on isolating oneself because the other is other. Just be one with the other. That's in the little death experience. The big death one is be one with everything. And it's like a blissful melting into, supreme oneness with everyone else present. Now there's a threshold experience in that people often get confused by, because we're so used to pain and to things being unsatisfying, that we somehow think the final thing is some kind of escape from everything. And there is an experience when you let yourself go, as if you sort of disappear, like, well, we have a little mini death every night, don't we? When you kind of let go of being aware of your cheek on the pillow. You let go that you're in this dark, quiet, nice, warm temperature, hopefully room, in a nice bed with, et cetera. and you just let go and you become unconscious. And of course, when you're unconscious, it's like a little death because you don't know where you are and you don't protect yourself. You don't have a boundary. You don't worry about anything. You just hope nobody disturbs you. So, but you feel a release of falling asleep, of course, especially if you're tired, If you don't fall asleep, you quickly run and drink some warm milk or take an Ambien or try to wear yourself out to go to sleep. So we humans can't bear being stuck in the prison of our conceptualized world all the time. We naturally have to sleep at least a third of the day, 8 hours a day. So, which means we're not in our conceptualized world. And we come back from it always. So when there's a meditative state that is deeper than sleep, where you go and you're sort of consciously separated from everything, and you don't even feel you're a body anymore. You just are a feeling of freedom in space, something like that. But suddenly it's not really freedom because you're apart from everything. But many people confuse that and they think that's the great experience, freedom, emptiness, beyond everything, nirvikalpa samadhi. They have all kind of words for it. But that's also, that's the last threshold of delusion. Because in fact, that's fitting with your concept that you have of being something apart from everything else. So it's kind of almost a psycho state, actually. And you can be trapped there, and they say you can be trapped for a long time. But I don't want to get into all of that complexity.
Well,
I want to say that the key thing is to be one with everything, and Doug Grunther's still right here. And we're all one. And Bob Thurman's here, and all the other people who are here. And in one way, so then after developing that tolerance, we learn to hold the idea that at some deep fundamental level we're one, and also at a relational or somewhat illusory, but it's still real level, we're different. So then we each have a contribution to make within our oneness. So, you sustain, in other words, the way you sustain the openness is by being able to hold. And then the bliss becomes so strong that you can hold the stress of the dissonance very easily.
So I want to expand on that holding the stress, because one of the intentions of this webinar and the website we built for it is to help seed the next renaissance. And so
to help
what I love about seed the next renaissance, help it emerge.
That is the
so I went into Google, my Google search tab, and I typed in Bob Thurman Renaissance. And I found out that in 2002, you worked with a group called the Infinity Foundation to put on a global Renaissance, completing the Global Renaissance program at Menla.
Yes, that's true.
So let's talk about this potential for the next Renaissance, because from my understanding of the first Renaissance, what really fomented it was the systematic breakdown, the Black Plague, and the breakdown of the church's control. And we're seeing a lot of breakdown now. And a Renaissance is a rebirth out of a structural breakdown. So it's not just a nice thought to hold on to stress. We now know that people are stressed out perhaps more than any time in human history, whether it's political, whether it's climate change, whether it's economic, psychological. Talk to us about what was discovered at that Global Renaissance program you ran at Menla, and how do we help grow the next Renaissance? Because it is going to require holding on to a lot of stress and dissonance.
Right. Well, there is a negative thing in a Renaissance, yes, but actually more strong is the positive thing that comes through the opening of the negative thing. And the positive thing about the Renaissance was that people took back in Europe, and that's to say in Europe, it was a worldwide thing, but Westerners only think it only happened in the West, but it was a worldwide thing. And what happened was that people took back their individual fulfillment from just being sort of part of a collective under the control of the church in the case of Europe, with their thought suppression that they had, and where Galileo couldn't look at the moon and notice the craters on there, et cetera. So people took back that the fulfillment that the human being was an amazing subjectivity and an amazing embodiment. And it didn't have to just grovel and be a sinner and be stupid and accept thought conformity and be part of a kind of collective and be bossed around by the Borgias and whatever, and so Borgia type people. And so that's really, it was that positive horizon of the human opportunity to achieve a really high level, blissful, happy, creative, productive state. That is what really was the energy of the Renaissance. And it was a worldwide Renaissance where, in the case of the Buddhist civilizations, people began to realize they didn't have to think, oh, gee whiz, I didn't meet Buddha 1,500 years ago. Now I can myself be Buddha. I can feel, I can understand reality. I can enjoy the bliss of nirvana while being alive and and sharing with others. And so what it is in this case, I think, and what that conference was about, is that we have achieved a lot of power over nature from our materialistic reductionism since the Renaissance. After the Renaissance, there was the Reformation and the Enlightenment, and we did achieve power over nature by understanding the workings of matter, atoms and electricity and et cetera, genes, and finally now we're into all that stuff.
It's intermission. Rise and stretch time. Time to refresh yourself and visit our snack bar.
The next show will start in 3 minutes.
With mustard and relish, you'll guarantee mouth-watering satisfaction. And now he sips his costume on a beautiful golden bun. There's his cue to go out on stage.
He's the natural.
He's the rage. Meet this personality at our refreshment counter. Treat the family.
Something different for a change? Then try the perfect refreshment. Chili Dilly, a delicious pickle treat that's spiced just right for every bite. Economical, too. There's no waste. You eat every bit of the juicy goodness of Chili Dilly. How about trying one right now? Chili Dilly, on sale at our concession stand. You'll love them.
Only 2 minutes left.
Mouth-watering Chili Dillies.
One minute left to top off the evening with a treat from our snack bar. Still time if you hurry. Last call for refreshments, folks. Go right this second to get something good to eat and drink to enjoy now or during the rest of the show. The finest quality ingredients are in the fixins of the delicious foods you'll find waiting to tempt your appetite at the snack bar. Extra special good hamburgers, wonderful donuts, ice-cold thirst-quenching drinks. Pizza generously sliced, steaming hot, fresh coffee, ice cream in many flavors.
And now, on with the show.
In order to escape from the fear that we were controlled by the church, we had to escape from the inner mind of what is our inner nature, the soul. And so the way we did it was we just made a dogma and we said, well, we don't have one. We're just robots. We're biological robots. We're just, we can have a lot of fun as robots, but we don't have a soul, so we don't have to worry about being excommunicated or God sending us to hell because we didn't pay the right dues in the right religion or whatever it was. We can just be secular and we'll be fine. And actually what we are inside is only an illusion of life, because what we really are is nothing, because everything really boils down to nothing. So they can't frighten us, because the worst that can happen is nothing. So they came up with this materialist / nihilist idea, and they abdicated the job of developing what in India was called inner science, the science of the way the mind and the subtle energy and the subtle body and life and death process and how it all works. And in fact, they claimed there couldn't be any such thing, because there is nothing inside anyway. It's just an empty robot. And even said, then later, some people heard about Buddhism and they said, oh, Buddhism says there's no self. Oh, they think that Buddhism agrees with that, but that's wrong. What Buddhism meant was there's no fixed self that is exactly unchanging, fixed there, absolute, disalienated from everything, but that there's a process of a living, interactive process of a self. They never denied that. And in fact, when you realize there's no fixed one, then you finally take responsibility for your living self. And the living self is much bigger than just being embedded in one particular material body. And there's a lot of empirical data that proves we've all lived before in many different forms, and we will continue to live in the future. But not that God can't mess with us. I mean, they can mess with us, but they don't really control how we will live in the future. We control it by how our attitudes, our awareness, our understanding, our openness to the nature of reality, our enlightenment, which means our openness to the nature of reality, which is our wisdom, our scientific knowledge of what reality is. And that will immediately stimulate and energize our blissful feeling. And for that will energize our incredible love and compassion for all life. Well, that's what enables us to connect to all life. So that's the new Renaissance, is the meeting of the outer and the inner sciences. Because just like we think we're super cool because we can destroy the universe with our atomic bomb, they already noticed that there's infinite energy beneath the level of the subatomic particles. And they already knew how to navigate that, actually. And they actually realized that we live at that level of energy. And in a way, at a deeper level, we're made of light. And our mind is pure light in a certain sense. It's the wave. It's not the particle, but it's the wave. And then it embeds itself. It can play with the particle, actually, if we really consciously are the wave. And that we all have that ability. And we've always had it, a human being particularly. Not every animal has it. All animals have the same nature. But we humans have evolved through many, many lifetimes as individuals, not just as species. And we're carrying around, Elon Musk's wildest supercomputer dream in the wetware in our brain. And actually, our brain is not only just in our head. That's just where it's clustered there, because we have 4 of the 5 senses clustered in the head. But our skin, of course, is all over the surface of the body, and our neurons are in the microbiome. We have 1 billion different genes and neurons in the navel chakra, and we have the vagus nerve, and we have our nervous systems throughout the body. So we're like an octopus nervous system running around in a little 2-legged skeleton, like trying to do a 4-minute mile. And so that discovery of those discoveries, which are as sophisticated in the inner dimension as neuroscience or atomic high particle energy particle physics is in the physical dimension. So the meeting of the two is where the global Renaissance can come from. The idea that we can understand how to develop the mind, that education can be an education for enlightenment, not just an education to get a job, or an education to become a politician, or an education to program computers like a slave, like a robot doing coding, but an education to fully enjoy this human embodiment, share that enjoyment with other human, and take care of animal and cult help animal embodiments. And then there's some other kinds of Star Trek type, super angel type beings that they might then deign to introduce themselves to us when we're a little less scary than we are when we're so frustrated, because we'll be happier, And that's the global, that was what that was about, but particularly the focus was the meaning of the inner science and the material science, the mind science, the material science.
So to expand on that, I see a very strong connection between what the Buddha did and what Einstein did, because they both used their minds as a laboratory. Einstein did not discover relativity in a laboratory. There were no test tubes, no Bunsen burners. He was at a desk doing a thought experiment, chasing a light beam. Yes. This has all been documented. The Buddha, as I understand from you, when he did his famous meditation, he was acting in his age as a scientist to explore how his mind worked and didn't work. Right. And yet today, most science is still materialistic. Most philosophy, and you taught at Columbia for many decades, correct me if I'm wrong, because when I went there and studied philosophy, it was mostly materialistic, empirical philosophy.
Yes.
And it seems to me, if we're going to usher in the next Renaissance, we have to tap into that right hemisphere part of our brain, which goes beyond materialism to the imaginal, the imaginative, the intuitive, the uncertain, which is what Einstein did.
Yes. Well, Einstein, remember that Einstein freaked out in 1926 over good Danish beer with Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg in Copenhagen, when Werner Heisenberg and Niels Bohr informed Einstein and colleagues that at the super micro level of physically trying to pin down the final building blocks of reality, they discovered there were no final building blocks, and there was no such thing as absolute objectivity. And that when you got down to the really micro level, the act of observation interacted with this object that you're observing in such a way that that you had to be responsible for your act of observation. And therefore there was this uncertainty principle, and they still haven't really figured that out fully, the high energy particle physics of people, because one of the reasons is that the materialist dogma killed philosophy in the West. It just killed it. And the philosophers, all academic philosophers all throughout the West, and in the Western versions, the Japanese version of the West, the Indian version of the West, wherever you have Russian version, they killed it off. And the philosopher became a kind of handmaiden of science. Because the real thing, it was already settled that reality is only material and ultimately doesn't exist even. It's just a random thing to think is there. And therefore, science is just measuring it. And therefore Einstein was stuck in that worldview, and he said, God does not play dice and screw you over the beer, to burn. But I said, I'm going to find a grand unified theory, and I'm going to find a conceptual structure using my mathematics and things that will actually really control reality, so it will fit with our concepts mathematically. And then people sort of took him seriously, because the openness that he had done with his relativity, which was his opening, and that was his enlightenment, that was his Buddha part, is the theory of his thought experiment opening up the relativity and the relativity of time and so on. And that good part enabled us to find the energy in the seeming particle and detonate the atom in a chain reaction and develop a super weapon, actually, something really destructive. But the point is, actually, our mind lives in that area of pure energy, and it's not destructive because it's not explosive. It's blissful, actually, when you're subjectively present there and you don't mind letting go of coarser structures. You don't have to blow them up. So my point is only that Einstein had that Buddha element, but he was still trapped in the dogma of materialism that limited his ability to really meet quantum and in a way embrace that there is a grand unified theory, which is the theory that there is no theory. And is the theory that experience trumps. They say in science, they only go by data, by experiment. And what experiment is, even a measurement, it's an experience. So experience should trump a theory, you see, because reality is beyond theories. Theories can give you perspectives and vectors and angles on it, and they're useful. It's not that they're useless. They are useful. But the point is, if you get stuck dogmatically in one and try to force reality into it, you become imprisoned in it. Whereas reality itself, the human being's intelligence is just such that it is like divine, and it's beyond divine, it's Buddhine, and it can really know everything, and therefore love it all, and make it right. And you don't have to blame this God or that God for creating a world with suffering, which is a nice thing, but you don't deny they exist. Okay, Buddhists don't deny that there are gods, unlike secularists. They're perfectly happy that there be gods. There's just no one big super boss who can be blamed for it all, actually. Oh yeah, you can say, oh, he's great, God is great, Allah Akbar, when you think he's on your side. But when you die, suffer, and your children are killed in front of your face, then you hate God. Of course, if you're a fanatic, you'll be subconscious about it because you don't dare think that you do, but you do. If you're in the middle of the Holocaust and then you think God let you down, then you're going to resent it. And actually, God himself is constantly trying to teach people. He helps those who help themselves. He's trying to teach them that they all have the power. He's quite powerful, but it's like Joe Biden. He can't fix it all. He has to ask the Congress to help and the people to vote, etc. Everybody does it together. That's key. That's really key. So, well, anyway, I forgot what I'm talking about. But, oh yeah, Einstein.
No.
I love Einstein. Anyway, and subsequent to Einstein, there have been great quantum people are all great, but most of them are still stuck in this game, like the whole fuss they made 2 or 3 years ago by finding the Higgs boson. And they made a big stink that now we know the secret of mass. And all the newspapers had it. Oh, scientists have discovered why there's mass. I mean, like why we're here. We have mass. And they made a big fuss. You know why? Because they wanted to make a bigger accelerator. And they wanted to move it to the south of France from Switzerland because the weather is better and the vegetables are juicier. Mm-hmm. And they're smart. They know that when you watch these electrons accelerating, you're going to be having lunch in a bistro. And they like to be in south of France. But they knew they need another 30 billion to make it. So we discovered something great, great, great. And if you read those articles, they all said, well, this is great. We now know the secret of mass. But gee whiz, we're only looking at 3% of the known universe because 97% of it is dark. And since it's dark, we didn't see it yet. So we don't know what the fuck we're talking about, actually, because 97% is still dark. It's like a little yang is just zipping around there. And there's a big yin. Nobody knows what it is. Actually, it's female, actually. That's what it is. So most of those guys are guys, and they're like really puzzled about it.
Well, I want to connect what you're saying to the potential for the next Renaissance, because you brought up that particle collider in Switzerland and France, right? Well, It was in that space, well underground, that in 1992, Tim Berners-Lee, an unknown technical guy, was frustrated that the different people from different countries their computers couldn't talk to each other. He said, this is ridiculous. We've got all this brain power, all this mind power, and no one's communicating. So he created, in essence, the World Wide Web.
Yes, that's wonderful.
And he made the decision. He knew, he's a smart guy. If he monetized this, he could become the richest man in the world very easily. But he said, no, this needs to be open source. This needs to be available to everybody.
Yeah.
So there's hope that the human brain can get to a point where instead of saying, how can I enrich myself only, how can I give what I discovered to the world? And now we have the Library of Alexandria at our fingertips, which was not available during the
not exactly. Some of the books have been lost irretrievably, but some of it we have. Yeah. We have 30,000 codices, actually, is what we have. Only 30,000. In Indian libraries, they had 3 million and counting. I'm sorry, 30 million and counting. And there are big libraries of Alexandria, So we one of our problems is Western Eurocentric idea that we are the vanguard. But that's our materialist thing. In materialism, we are the vanguard for sure. But the problem is we all have minds, and India has helped for us to really look into the minds. And among them, the Tibetans kept some of the biggest treasures that the Indians had, which then they were conquered by Westerners for 1,000 years now. First by Persians, Arabs, and Tajiks, and second by the British and Portuguese and Dutch and French, and mainly end up with British. and so, but their ancient culture and it really has it. It's so our conference was the meeting of the Indo-Tibetan and then the European, worldwide thing. So that's really important. We have to break past the idea that we're advanced when actually we're backward. We're threatening the world with nuclear weapons and militarism, and we're threatening the world with consumerist pollution, on the other hand. So in other words, what our industrial revolution and our materialist prowess has done from an alienated vantage point of people who don't exist, our psychoculture that doesn't exist, ultimately, is we have actually put the world into a very dangerous situation. So what we need now is to get our minds to that thing about it, to give it, he did it, which was great. But we need everyone to be having that attitude instead of, I want to grab this and that for myself, And then people in the West go around saying, oh, how many people are going to be great like that guy? Oh, that'll never happen. Everybody's going to Vegas and grab stuff and gamble and then rob people, whatever, everybody's going to be like certain people who luckily have moved to Florida. But that's wrong. See, if we have the inner science, we can educate people where lots of people will be like the guy who created the World Wide Web. Lots of people want to realize that the true pleasure and the true happiness comes from giving, from loving, not from grabbing and being dissatisfied because you then want more, if you follow me. Yeah. And realizing that we have the inconceivable wealth of being sensitive human beings. We can listen to Doug Grunther on the morning show, and we can eat feast at far different restaurants mentally. We can enjoy delicious dishes in 4 restaurants, just imaginatively from his beautiful way of describing them. So we realize we have a wealth in the mind that is the great wealth, really. It's our reaction to what happens to us. It's our reaction to our possessions. It's our reaction to our situations that causes the quality of it to be exquisite. It's not just grabbing it. You choke the life out of it when you grab it. It's stagnated when you billions of dollars. What can anybody do with hundreds of billions of dollars? It's like one giant piece of economic constipation. Jeff Bezos lost his hair. He was like, what, he doesn't have any hair. He's like, what is he going to do with it? He gave us a divorce settlement. He must have been happy to be relieved of $40 billion in a divorce settlement. A new girl. And actually, her settlement doubled since he gave it to her. $80 billion now. And the point is, he's great. That's very creative of him within the parameters of this wrong materialist society, the wrong backward parameters. In the parameters of an enlightened society, he is in ecstasy because he can give away. He's worth 160 billion now. He can give away 159.9 billion, and he still can float in the air with a mere 10 million. That's all you need to live.
So in 2002, you did that conference called Completing the Global Renaissance.
Yeah.
Here we are 19 years later.
Yes.
Do you see any signs that we can usher in this next Renaissance? Because there's a lot of darkness out there, but there was before the first Renaissance in Italy.
Yes. Well, the point is we can because we have to. And we have to because this is something we may not know, and it may not be generally known, but I have it on the reliable testimony of the IPCC, the climate change people, who had the Nobel Prize for that, with Al Gore. And that is that of all the carbon pollution in the atmosphere, which is just one of the kind of pollutions, the soil is polluted, the water is polluted, the air is polluted, and the temperature is polluted. So all earth, water, fire, and wind are all polluted. But the point is, of all of it, since 1850 to 2020, the excessive carbon in the atmosphere and greenhouse gases, methane and other ones, half of it was put in since 2000. So we doubled down in our stupidity, and we matched the pollution of 150 years of industrial overproduction in 20 years of Rex Tillerson and W. Bush, the oil man, and and what's his face? And Obama was unable to stop it. He got into baby drill too. Fracking. Fracking is terrible. It wrecks the water table. It's really destructive, actually, incredibly, of the water system as well as the air, and all the methane released off the fracking oil heads and everything. Yes, it made us look like we had money and we didn't need the Saudis temporarily, but point is, it was just a disaster. So therefore, if we keep doing that, we're finished. California, with people from California, they'll all be here in the Hudson Valley. And we'll be really freaked out because we don't have room for all of California in the Hudson Valley. But they are going to be climate refugees, not only California, Oregon, and Washington, right up into UBC, if we keep going like this. Those fires are not stopping. And the droughts and, Kansas and Iowa, floods and droughts, and forget about it. So the children of the executives of Archer Daniels Midland, Cargill, all those companies that are polluting and wrecking with petroleum-based nitrogen fertilizer and wrecking the topsoil by thousands of millions of tons every year, their children will disown them if they keep it up. So therefore, we're going to have it. Therefore, we got Joe Biden and Kamala Devi, and we're going to fix it now. And people are having, and then COVID. The silver lining of COVID is, COVID comes, and Ebola and another 50 COVIDs. They come from our ravaging of the rainforest and exposing instead of the network of nature protecting us from zootropic or zoonotic, I think they call them zoonotic diseases that we're not, we haven't evolved to resist, the human sensitive organism. And they are just piling out bats, bugs, crocodiles, lizards. They're all going to bring them out, and we're going to be, and COVID has shown that we have no defense against that. All our vaunted nuclear weapon, you can't nuke. I'm sure Trump thought of how to nuke the virus. He wants to nuke hurricanes, right? He wants to nuke a virus, but you can't really nuke a virus now, can you? You have to change your whole lifestyle. You have to change your diet. The underlying conditions of the people of color are not some racial thing. That's because they've been put in neighborhoods filled with it, and they all have asthma because they're put in downwind from all the refineries everywhere in every place, and the trash burners and the plastic disposal units and whatever. And therefore, they all have asthma. They also, in food deserts, they don't have vegetables. Nice, good old Woodstock vegetables, asparagus to eat. They just eat burgers and pizza. That's it. They go to fast food places, and they don't have vegetable stores of any kind. So we have to change all of this, and we have to do it fast. And we're going to, Doug, and you are doing global renaissance. I don't know what this is, TV, internet, radio, whatever it is, you're doing it. And we love it. And it's great.
Well, it's always a treat to have you on because you never back off from telling us the truth and throwing the dark stuff in, because as a self-defense teacher once taught me, if you don't understand the dark, you can't see the light. And there's plenty of dark, and we need the light, and you're one of the beacons, and you have been for a long time, and we appreciate it.
Well, yeah, but I'm trying to understand the dark matter and dark energy. We're all that too. We have that too. And we can only find that with the mind, you see, because we don't see that on the spectrum that we can see. But it's there, and luckily it's cool. It's calm and cool. Actually, it'll help us. It's like the goddess. It's the great mother. It's me. By the way, there's a rabbi I know. I love this guy. He has a theory. He just published a book. Talk about global renaissance. That YHWH, which is like a Dharma concept, I love that, that's the name of the divine. So the idea that the supreme power of the universe is not some idol that you can own. It's everywhere, and it's even in you, and you better conform to its energies, and that's so brilliant, but he has analyze that way back in the Torah and all this in the Kabbalah, whatever it is. And he says what the Y and the W are E and U disguised. And then actually you can pronounce the name, and it's he who. The two H's, he who. And what he who is, but I don't know Hebrew, so I don't know if he's correct or I may be also misunderstanding him. I didn't finish it. He just sent me his book as a PDF. I haven't read it fully yet, but I know the thesis. He who means he, she. He, she. So in the most ancient level, in the Hebrew brilliant genius discovery, the male-female nature of the ultimate, male-female union nature of the ultimate is there, not just this patriarchal, it's just daddy with no mommy. And because mommy is the dark energy, daddy's that little, that little tiny piece of sperm and then big egg. That's the way the universe runs. So we need mommy. So I love that rabbi. I hope he doesn't get excommunicated by the other rabbis. I hope they like it. He's somewhere in Connecticut, but he wrote this great book. He who was the name, secret name of God for the kahens, for the high priest, and they disguised it by making it something that the ordinary people couldn't pronounce. But they said, well, it's just when you breathe, so that God is in your breath. I love it. It's so beautiful. Really.
Well, certainly with between COVID and climate change, Mother Earth is having something to say, and we'll tune in and figure out what the message is.
We're tuning in. We are tuning in. Doug is tuning us in.
Well, we always appreciate your time. By the way, I love the mandala behind you.
That's wonderful. That's the Wheel of Time mandala, and it's a little complicated to explain, but it's really quite a wonderful thing. It's not well lit just now because the sun has been going down, and it gets too bright when I turn the light on. But it's really quite fun actually. And all it is it's not really some mysterious thing. It's like if we really knew our own realities right now, we're all living in a palace of joy. And we can breathe in oxygen, which we need, because all those trees and plants and bushes and even weeds are taking our carbon, and they're handing us back the oxygen that we need, and we are in this perfectly embraced by all sorts of invisible things. And we have to learn to trust reality, actually. That is the way of developing beyond tolerance of dissonance and to stress, is learning to trust the universe. We're all terrorized by governments and by patriarchy and things like that into thinking that reality is dangerous and horrible, and we really have to hide from it, and we really need them to protect us from it. And once we know that we can trust reality, that we don't even fear death anymore. We just we're one with it. And some people come through that through religious faith, and some people come through it by having had a good mom when they were little, and some people come to it from other previous life insights that they had when they learned things in previous lives. But that's the key, is to learning that reality is really good.
Well, it's so interesting that the mandala behind you is a circle, and you've brought us full circle back to the original quote that I asked you about. Wisdom is tolerance of cognitive dissonance.
Yes.
And that circle and that tolerance comes out, and we need it. We appreciate it. And it's always a pleasure to spend time with you. I'm glad I had my seatbelt fastened. When I listened to Bob, and it was great to be able to just really focus on it, because interviewing him, my mind is not always on what he's saying. I feel like I'm on a spiritual roller coaster, and it's a heck of a ride. Hope you enjoyed that. I'm going to bring in my colleague, Ron Van Wormer, because we didn't have time today. It's our first one. We're getting our feet wet, but we want to at least get one question or comment from somebody watching us live. So what do you have for us, Ron?
So the question comes from Diane in Saugerties, New York.
Okay.
And how exactly do you define a quantum leap? And can you give an example of a specific quantum leap in the 21st century?
Well, thanks for the easy question. A quantum leap, I go back to, I love reading the philosophy underneath quantum physics. I don't understand quantum physics, but I'm encouraged by Richard Feynman, who won a Nobel Prize for quantum physics, who said anyone who says they understand it doesn't. But Bob Thurman referenced the Solway conferences in the 1920s, when all the greatest scientific minds would meet every year. Einstein, Niels Bohr, Werner Heisenberg, Schrodinger. to debate the philosophical, because they understood that what they were discovering was so weird. And at the quantum level of existence, things can just happen without any cause and effect. So in terms of a quantum leap, what I mean, I'll connect it to the right hemisphere of the human brain. Our left hemisphere is excellent at piecing things together, getting to a certain level of certainty to problems for which there are certain answers. It is not wired to deal with the VUCA forces that are at work in our 21st century, which are volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. I'll give you an example of what I consider a quantum leap. As I was going to bed last night, I had made my notes as to how I was going to open this first webinar. Now, I've been talking about these subjects for over 10 years, including dozens of salons, dozens of radio programs. I had lots of notes, and I thought I had would be a really good start. But I know better, that I was too certain. And so what I did was I asked my unconscious to give me a better answer, and I slept on it. Now, it doesn't always work, but it works a fair amount. When I woke up, it was very clear to me. Talk about VUCA. Now, to me, that's a quantum leap because it happened at the unconscious, non-material level. I also organized today by going through my notes and figuring out I want to talk about this or do I want to talk about that's the left brain. That's important. But the ultimate choice came from the unconscious percolating through the right hemisphere, which got me to VUCA, which I hadn't even thought about. So to me, that's at least some example of a psychological quantum leap. And to me, VUCA itself is a quantum leap. It comes out of the U.S. Army War College. I don't expect our military to come up with strategies and ways of looking at the world that are so useful to cultural creatives who want to bring about the next Renaissance. But they did. And it percolated through universities, which tend to hold on to things and be very left brain too. Our educational system, even a lot of colleges, are very left brain oriented. But now now it's out and we can access it on the World Wide Web. And I encourage you to do it because, well, Bob Thurman said a lot of interesting things, but one thing that stuck out for me is, do we stay open or do we stay closed in our minds? When we are confronted with volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, and we are going to. Can we learn to stay open to that and work through it to a more enlightened state, to more quantum leaps? Or do we do what we're all guilty of? We want to be comfortable, shut down, either choose one side or the other. Welcome to our current political divide, which is also a psychological divide. Or do we stay present to it and allow opposing views and values to percolate to something larger? And, even someone as practical as Thomas Edison, maybe the most prolific inventor of all time, or one of them, would take cat naps and wake up with answers. So to me, a quantum leap is where we allow the unconscious to come up with answers, and then we're open to that. And it's a very different process than we were taught in most of our classes. So thank you, Diane, for that comment. My email, if you have comments or questions about this or anything on our website, is doug@rightbrainnetwork.org. The website, we encourage you, check out the Next Renaissance section. We update it every week with a new essay, with new links to great sources of right hemisphere thinking and information. That's rightbrainnetwork.org. You need to, right now, until the Google spiders get us more prevalent, you have to type that right into your URL bar with no spaces, and it'll get you there. And I want to thank some folks without whom this couldn't have been possible. Thank you, Ron Van Wormer, my colleague. He will join me on the radio. We're on every Sunday morning live on Radio Woodstock, which you can access on the internet or at 100.1 FM. And every other week, Victoria Sullivan, our poet laureate, joins us. She'll be on this Sunday, so tune in for that. I want to thank John Vernile, who's been a great colleague. Carrie Harrison out in LA, who from VIP webinars, thank you so much. Love the drive-in stuff. And we're going to keep doing this. So next month, by the way, our special guest will be Ian McGilchrist, I think the brightest mind on the right hemisphere of the human brain. And we did an amazing 45 minutes with him. So that'll be on March 24th. We have quotes and links for Ian on our website. We have quotes and links to Bob Thurman on our website. And this has been a real cool trip. So until next month, be well.
And now, folks, it's time to say goodnight. We sincerely appreciate your patronage and hope we've succeeded in bringing you an enjoyable evening of entertainment. Please drive home carefully and come back again soon. Good night.